A couple of weeks ago, I packed up my life and moved out of my 55 plus community. I'd lived there for a year. And ever since then, I've been asked the same question over and over again. Do you miss it? Would you ever go back? And I think the answer may surprise you, because after all, I did just move out. My answer is yes, I would consider moving back. Maybe not necessarily to that particular community, but to a 55 plus community for sure, if certain conditions were met. Because this experience has taught me several valuable lessons about living in a 55 plus community, and that's what I want to share with you today. So 2 weeks ago, I moved into this new condo and I felt it was a win-win situation because even though it's smaller than what I was leaving, I was also going to have a much cheaper rent. I was renting the place before and I'm renting still, and for $1,000 a month cheaper. So saving $12,000 a year was a big deal to me. I still get to stay within the same neighborhood. I still get the same quieter lifestyle. This is an 18 plus building. And I'm still close in proximity to my family, which was a big factor for me as I look after the grandkids fairly often. And so I didn't want to add to my driving time to go see them. So this new condo basically checked off all the boxes for me. But it gives me a chance to look back objectively at my experience living in a 55 plus community. And these are the things that I want to share with you. I think the first big lesson is that not all 55 plus communities are created equal. They look really different. They operate really differently. And I think the key is to find the one that suits you, your lifestyle, your needs the best. So some of them are really small little tiny home communities in a rural setting. That would be really cool. And some people even suggested that for me. But I live in Alberta, Canada, and we live close to mountains. And so it gets really, really cold. And lots of these communities are not set up for the kind of weather that we have. We're starting to introduce them, but they're not as common as what they are, let's say, down in the US. Some of them are apartment style, and that was the kind that I was coming from. It looked like a big old apartment. And then some of them, they're owned, some are rented, some are out in the country, some are right downtown in the middle of a city. They are all very different with the amenities that they offer, the programs that they offer. The building that I went into was advertised for active 55 plus year olds. So to be honest with you, I was envisioning almost like living on a cruise ship, you know? I was envisioning wine tastings and going out to shows together and cooking classes together and a whole bunch of different really fun activities. And to be honest, we did have some of that. And in fact, my first 6 months, I thought this was the greatest thing ever. I sang more and danced more and drank more and socialized more in that first 6 months than I had for the last 2 years. So it was definitely a social atmosphere that I was really enjoying. But because it was a new building, and I kind of think it was a bit of a honeymoon phase, and then real life takes over, like I'm babysitting my grandkids fairly often, like 3 to 5 days a week. Their mom's maternity leave had ended. So when I came home at the end of the day, the last thing I wanted to do was attend meetings or write up minutes to meetings, or even socializing just seemed like too much work, too much energy. I know that if I go into a 55 plus again in the future, I'll be a lot more picky about which activities I get involved in. I'm not going to say yes to everything. I'll just choose one or two because I still want to keep that balance. And this was a good lesson for me to not want to get involved in too much too fast, especially since I had a whole bunch of other things going on in my life outside of the community. Another big takeaway was how valuable my friendships that I made there are to me. You know, you think about the age difference, but if there's something I really learned from my father is that age is just a number. He was 79 years old. He was 79 going on 50. So the night before he died, he was killed in a farming accident. He and Mom, they were off dancing. There are people there that would run circles around me, even though I was 10 years younger than them. I need to do something about that, by the way. I know when you get into a community of people, human nature takes over. There's going to be some real grumps. There's going to be some real social people. There's a mixture, right? You're going to get some of that negativity and politics and gossip. You're going to get that anywhere you go. You get it in your workplace. You get it in your neighborhood. It doesn't matter. But I think what has to happen is that we have to make a decision as to what part of that we're going to be involved in and really just be selective as to who we hang out with. Anyway, these people are lovely and we've become really good friends. And I went out with a group of them just a few nights ago, went out for supper. I'm meeting one of them tonight to go to the Odyssey. And we're even talking about traveling together in the future. So even though we're not sharing the same building, I know that we're just going to continue our friendship. And I know that had I not taken the chance and moved into that building in the first place, these people would have never come into my life. And that makes me very sad. It is good to have these social connections. There's a ton of research out there about how important these social connections are to us. And whether these social connections come from family or our neighborhood or our place of work or a community in which we live, doesn't really matter. Just having those connections in some way, shape, or form are really important for our mental health and even our physical health. And that brings me to another really important lesson. Having sat and chatted with a lot of the people that lived in this 55 plus, I realized how many of them had moved in order to be closer to family. So they had moved anywhere from the next province, from across the entire country, from another country even. And they came in order to have close proximity to their children and their grandchildren. But they also recognized that their families were not going to be the center of their world. They recognized that their children and their grandchildren have lives, have jobs, partners, hobbies of their own, and that they would be part of their family's lives, but that they needed to really focus on building a life of their own. And so that's where that 55 plus community came in, because it allowed them their own social connections on top of reaching out to their family and spending time with their families. So they didn't see it as an instead of, they saw it as an add-on. And so I thought this was a really important lesson that, yes, move closer to our families if that's what our heart is telling us to do, but also let's not forget to build a life that is ours as well. Something else I learned as I was hanging out with and listening to many of the people in this 55 plus community, I noticed that the younger people, like those in our late 50s and early 60s, were saying things like, I'm on my own, I'm doing this solo, and I'm quite happy to be independent. It's all about freedom. And I'm in that box for sure. I've made a joke in a previous video that I'm a commitment phobe. And that's where I am at this stage of my life. But I also came to recognize that there were some people there that had gone through that phase, and they were going into another phase where they were more open to having a partner, a companion. They weren't interested in living with somebody or remarrying, but they were very much open to the idea of just having a companion to go to movies with or suppers with, or even maybe go on a trip with. They didn't want this big Hollywood romance. They just wanted someone to share these life experiences with. And I couldn't help but notice that they had said just the opposite when they were younger. They had gone through that time where they said, nope, that's not for me. But as they grew older, they were more open to it. And I'm wondering if this is true for other people out there. And if you don't mind, please write in the comments if you can relate to this. Was there a time when you went, nope, absolutely not, I'm independent, I'm solo. But as you get older, you're thinking, my social needs are now changing and I am open to the idea of companionship. Something else I figured out was that there's a lot of stereotypes out there. I've seen many videos talking about 55 plus communities, and in the comments, there's seems to be two camps. Some people said they could never see themselves going into a 55 plus community, that they were too independent. And I think this is where we allow stereotypes to get in the way. A 55 plus community, especially the one that I was in, is very independent. I think people really get 55 plus communities confused with assisted living type places. So my mom, she went through the different levels of care in assisted living where, you do have an apartment with a kitchen, but you have one meal provided for you a day. And then as her needs progressed, then she got into more and more high-level care. And now she's in a long-term care where there's doctors and nurses 24/7, right? This was not like that at all. To me, it was like living in an apartment building where they had a big amenity room where they had all kinds of activities going on that you can decide whether you wanted to partake or not. Some viewers even commented that these places are people simply moving in and waiting to die. And that was not my experience at all. There were people who were snowbirds and they traveled someplace else for 6 months and just locked their door. And then they came back after the 6 months in order to enjoy the Canadian summer. There were people who were volunteering in different programs throughout the city that we live in. Red Hat or SPCA or their church. There were some very active people walking every single day, working out on the equipment, going swimming every day. There were people who were dating. There was a romance that bloomed while we were there. And yeah, there were some people who kept all to themselves and rarely socialized with any of us, or were kind of grumpy when we did try to reach out to them. But you know what? Just like in any neighborhood, there's going to be all kinds of personalities and all kinds of different levels of interaction. And the same thing could be said for a 55 plus community. And in the other camp, there were people who said they absolutely love their community. And I was so happy to read those comments. And that really reminded me that my experience, this 1 year that I just had, is just one experience, and that there isn't one right answer. What we need to do is figure out what our priorities are, what's most important to us, and where do we want to live, how close do we want to live to our family, what kind of lifestyle do we want, what are our health needs, because that's going to be a huge priority as well. I don't want to be out in the middle of the country where there's a bit of a drive to go to a doctor or the grocery store or the bank. Some people won't like that. They want to be out in the country, and that's great for them. I would also consider the cost, because I have to admit, I've noticed that the 55 plus communities are more expensive than just living in an apartment, because they are providing a lot of activities and space for those programs to take place. So they do charge you. But I think what's really important is figuring out what are your priorities, what are your needs, and then finding the place that matches you the best. And that brings me back to my original question. Would I ever live in a 55 plus community again? And the answer is yes. Under the right circumstances, I definitely would. But now I know which questions I'd ask first, right? Like, I think about what my priorities are. I think about what kind of people I want to be around. I think about the location of it. I think about the lifestyle that I want. Because a 55 plus community is not just about finding a place to live in our retirement. It's about creating a life that we genuinely enjoy living. And so do I regret having lived in that 55 plus community for that 1 year? Absolutely not. The friendships that I made were worth every single cent that I spent being there. And I hope that those friendships will be with me for many years to come. And I don't know where I'll be in the next year, 5 years, 10 years. But what I do know is that I will always be grateful that I took that chance. So I hope this video has given you a few things to think about and maybe even resonated with you a little bit. And if you wouldn't mind sharing your experiences having lived in a 55 plus community and putting it in the comments below, I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and above all, have a wonderful day.